By definition, all war is deadly. Even among the great catastrophes of the modern age, World War II remains one of the most chilling examples of wide-scale devastation. The war lasted 8 years and involved more than 50 nations and 100 million soldiers. Some 60 million people died in the war, with the greatest casualties occurring in the Soviet Union, which was largely responsible for defeating Germany, China, which was invaded by Japan, and Germany. 2/3 of the casualties, or over 45 million people, were civilians. Among the casualties, some 200,000 civilians were killed or injured in the American atomic bombing of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States remains the only nation to have deployed atomic weapons in combat. Amidst the suffering, can war result in medical advances? We can explore this question by considering World War II, during which chemotherapy was first developed to treat the deadly disease of cancer. Cancer is a type of disease in which some of the body's cells grow uncontrollably and spread to other parts of the body. The condition affects 1 in 3 people in the United States. The disease can occur almost anywhere in the body. It starts when there are changes to the genes that control how our cells grow and divide. Our bodies consist of some 37 trillion cells. Each of these cells contains a nucleus filled with DNA proteins. These proteins are arranged in a structure like a code and provide information to make every cell we need to live. Cells have a limited lifespan from about 13 days to 18 months. To keep our body alive, our cells are constantly cloning themselves. The cells split in half, with each side containing a perfect copy of our DNA, so that each new cell behaves exactly like the old one. With millions of cells constantly cloning themselves, sometimes things can go wrong. Instead of making a perfect copy, a change or a mutation occurs. Over time, these mutations can cause cells to lose the capacity to grow and divide in an orderly manner. As the mutated cells reproduce, they can grow out of control. This leads to the formation of an extra lump of tissue, in other words, a tumor. Fortunately, our innate immune system can identify and destroy cancer cells. However, our immune system is not perfect, and some cancer cells continue to grow and spread. The most common kinds of solid tumor cancers are breast, prostate, lung, and colorectal cancers. Blood cells can also develop cancer, leading to leukemia, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. Ancient physicians were highly aware of cancer, especially solid tumor cancers. Hippocrates called the disease karkinos, or cancer, possibly because the tumors were hard like a crab shell. Hippocrates believed tumors were caused by an imbalance in the humors, specifically too much black bile. We now know that the genetic changes that cause cancer happen for a variety of reasons. Some gene changes can be inherited from our parents if the changes are present in the reproductive cells, i.e. eggs and sperm. Some cancers are triggered by viral infections like human papillomavirus or HPV. So yes, getting vaccinated can prevent certain cancers later in life. Our DNA can also be damaged by substances like tobacco smoke. By the way, doctors have known that tobacco use is unhealthy since the 1600s. The greatest risk factor for cancer is age. As we grow older, our immune system is less able to respond to cell mutations, making it more likely that cancer cells will survive, grow, and spread. Since modern public health and medicine allows many people to live longer, we are more likely to die of cancer than in the past. Most cancer medicine uses one of three approaches. The first is to strengthen the immune system, which is still done, for example, using traditional Chinese medicine. Another ancient approach is surgery to remove cancerous cells. Egyptian medical texts dating back 3,000 years recommend removing breast tumors. However, this was extremely dangerous and painful. Not only was there blood loss and risk of infection, but the procedures were too agonizing for patients to endure. They often preferred to just let the tumors grow. What the world needed was anesthesia. Starting about 3,000 years ago, Chinese scientists began experimenting with using psychoactive plants like cannabis to ease medical procedures. Plants like the flowering mantuolo, or thorn apple, were dissolved in wine and given to patients to ease dental surgery. Knowledge of these techniques spread throughout Asia. In the late 1700s, Japanese doctor Hanaoka Seishu began experimenting with Chinese herbal medicines as well as Western surgical techniques, which he studied under a Dutch doctor, Philip Franz von Siebold, in Nagasaki. Using a combination of herbal extracts, Hanaoka devised an anesthetic that permitted patients to undergo significant surgical procedures like removing tumors. His first successful patient was a brave 60-year-old woman suffering from breast cancer who underwent surgery in 1804. By the way, Dr. von Siebold and a famous courtesan had a daughter, Kusamoto Ine. Kusamoto also studied medicine and became personal physician to the Emperor Meiji's concubines. Back in Europe, chemists were also experimenting with new psychoactive compounds, like sulfuric acid diluted into wine, now known as ether. When inhaled, ether was found to produce a distinct sensation of euphoria. Ether became popular in the UK and US in the early 1800s. Poor people used ether to get high when they couldn't afford alcohol. By the 1840s, doctors began experimenting with the drug and discovered that ether could help patients endure painful procedures, including removing tumors. Using anesthetics like ether made it possible to remove large cancer tumors much more effectively. The third kind of cancer treatment kills damaged cells still in our bodies. A major breakthrough happened in 1896 when German physicist William Röntgen discovered a kind of energy that could pass through solid material and be photographed. He dubbed them X-rays since he did not understand where the energy came from. Polish scientist Marie Curie researched this mysterious form of energy. She demonstrated that elements released measurable amounts of energy due to unstable atomic properties. She called this process radioactivity. For her research on radioactivity, she won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry. By the early 20th century, radiation machines were used to treat cancer by eliminating or killing cancerous cells. Marie Curie later developed a mobile X-ray unit, which could be installed on trucks. The French Army used these in World War I to treat bullet and shrapnel wounds and to locate and set broken bones on the front lines. World Wars I and II were prompted by Germany's desire to grow its economy and military through colonial expansion. However, Germany was late to colonialism compared to its European rivals, the UK and France. Late to the colonial game in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, Germany targeted the sparsely populated areas of Eastern and Central Europe. Both times, its drive to expand its borders resulted in deadly conflict. World War I resulted in global shortages of food and supplies. In many countries, civilians starved to support the war effort. World War I dragged on in Europe for 4 terrible years. Tired of a war over wealth for the upper classes, workers, soldiers, and progressives began to fight against the anti-democratic and patriarchal monarchies that led the continent to slaughter. Around the world, the era ushered in multiple revolutions, including in China, Spain, and Mexico. In Germany, a socialist workers' movement demanded that the post-war German government be one of the people, by the people, and for the people. German revolutionary leaders like Rosa Luxemburg refused to accept an elitist post-war political system, and instead fought for the right of the German people to create their own democratic system. The German Revolution was put down brutally. Rosa Luxemburg was beaten to death and dumped into a Berlin canal by right-wing police. Capitalist governments, fearful of the global rise of leftism, funded right-wing, pro-business politicians. In Italy, the British backed the rise of Benito Mussolini, who was a minor journalist before starting a fascist party. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his party were financed by the Krupp arms dealers and IG Farben, Europe's largest corporation. Ford and General Motors subsidiaries built trucks and provided raw materials to help rebuild the Nazi-led German military. U.S. computer firm IBM sold the Nazis the punch card machines that helped track and arrest hundreds of thousands of Jews throughout Europe. In 1930, the Nazis won a significant number of seats in the German parliament. They celebrated victory by destroying and looting Jewish businesses. Even before they gained power, everyone knew Nazis were racists. But the Nazis had less than half the seats in Germany's parliament, so Hitler was brought to power by a right-wing politician, Franz von Papen, who agreed to support Hitler's bid for the chancellor position. After Hitler became chancellor, the Nazis set fire to the German parliament building, the Reichstag. They blamed it on the communists and declared martial law, arresting and murdering political opponents. Once in power, the Nazis rewrote German law. They made unions illegal. They murdered disabled and gay people. Jews were stripped of citizenship, robbed of their wealth, and sent to concentration camps to be murdered. The Germans kept incomplete data on the number of people they killed. Toward the end of the war, when their defeat was likely, they destroyed much of the documentation. However, using surviving materials, historians have reconstructed the numbers of Jews and other minorities killed by the Nazis and their partners, which total some 6 million people. The Nazis also exported fascism, for example, backing a right-wing coup against a democratically elected left-wing government in Spain. In the U.S., the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi political party, held marches and rallies, including a massive rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939. Fascism in the UK and US was halted by mass public support for democracy and protests against Nazi genocide. The US remained officially neutral and continued to trade with both Germany and Japan until 1941. Seeking to expand into Eastern and Central Europe, Germany absorbed Austria in 1938 and invaded Czechoslovakia and Poland in 1939. The UK and France responded by declaring war on Germany. Germany invaded France in the summer of 1940. After surrender, the French government collaborated with the Nazis. Germany began a massive bombing campaign of the UK, called the Blitzkrieg, or Blitz for short, meaning lightning war. Around 40,000 civilians were killed and up to 150,000 were injured. 2 million homes were destroyed. The British called up reinforcements from their colonial empire, drawing upon troops from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean to help fight Germany. Japan's road to war was also developed over decades. Between 1868 and 1920, Japan industrialized rapidly. This created great wealth, but also led to a widening economic divide. A major earthquake and the Great Depression after 1929 increased poverty and social stress. To build its economy and gain military influence, Japan built an overseas empire. It gained Taiwan as a colony in 1898, took over Korea in 1910, and began expanding into northeastern China, then known as Manchuria. Although profitable, the continental Japanese empire was unstable and violent. The Korean independence movement was galvanized in 1919 by peaceful demonstrations led by young people, including schoolgirls like Yu Guansun. As the global economy worsened in the 1930s, the Japanese political situation grew more unstable. In 1932, naval officers assassinated Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi, and Japan became a military dictatorship. In summer 1937, the Japanese military accused Chinese soldiers of firing at a Japanese battalion stationed outside Beijing. The Japanese used this as a pretext to invade, starting off World War II in Asia. As Japanese forces advanced in China, inexperienced and undisciplined troops killed hundreds of thousands of people. The Chinese government fled upriver to the foggy city of Chongqing, where it eked out survival while sheltering thousands of refugees. To prevent supplies from reaching Chongqing, Japan targeted Southeast Asia. Since France was now a collaborationist regime for the Germans, and Japan and Germany were allies, Japan used this as a pretext to take over the French colony of Indochina, now modern Vietnam. The Japanese occupation of Vietnam prompted the US and UK to freeze Japanese assets and begin an oil embargo. Japan lost access to 3/4 of its overseas trade and 88% of its imported oil. 5 months later, in December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, finally drawing the United States into what had already been a 4-year conflict. The same day as Pearl Harbor, Japan invaded the British colony of Hong Kong. 9 hours later, it invaded the U.S. colonies of Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines. Via Navy, tanks, and bicycle troops, Japan proceeded to attack Thailand, as well as the British colonies of Singapore and Burma. On December 8, 1941, Germany joined Japan in declaring war on the U.S. The U.S. responded by declaring war back. U.S. entry into the war launched one of our most shameful national tragedies. This was the illegal imprisonment of over 100,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry in internment camps in 7 states. The U.S. did not send troops to Europe for over a year after Pearl Harbor, and never sent troops to China. The fight against Germany and Japan was carried out by Chinese and Russian armies, and the underground resistance in Poland, France, Korea, Vietnam, and other occupied territories. Knowing that resistance was taking place somewhere gave other people the courage to resist as well. And people who were safe from direct harm knew that they were not alone in making sacrifices. U.S. officials worried that Germany might repeat some of their deadliest weapons from World War I, including mustard gas. Mustard gas produced terrible chemical burns on skin, eyes, and the lining of the lungs and stomach. Scientists were asked to study chemical warfare. At Yale in 1942, 2 scientists used nitrogen mustard to treat a 48-year-old man in the terminal stages of lymphosarcoma. Within 2 days, doctors noticed that his tumors were softer, and by the end of treatment, they had disappeared. They hypothesized, but were not yet certain, that the gas had killed the cells. On the night of December 2, 1943, German forces bombed an important Allied port in Bari, Italy. More than 1,000 U.S. and British servicemen and hundreds of civilians were killed, and 17 ships were sunk. One of the U.S. ships was carrying a secret cargo of 2,000 mustard gas bombs. The bombs were planned to be used as retaliation against any German chemical weapon attack. When the vessel was struck, mustard gas filled the air and seeped into the harbor waters. The existence of the bombs was a secret, so no one was informed of what was happening. Survivors were given morphine for pain, wrapped in warm blankets, and sat in their oil and mustard gas-soaked uniforms for up to 24 hours, while critically injured servicemen were treated first. Survivors developed red, inflamed skin and blisters on their bodies the size of balloons. Within 24 hours, the hospital wards were full of men with eyes swollen shut. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Alexander, an American doctor from New Jersey and a chemical warfare specialist on General Eisenhower's staff, was sent to the scene of the disaster to investigate. Alexander identified the cause of the wounds as mustard gas. He furthermore reported that the mustard gas blocked the formation of white blood cells in the patients. This helped prove that chemical warfare agents could stop the growth of cells. Chemotherapy works by targeting fast-growing cells like cancer cells. However, it also affects fast-growing healthy cells like skin, hair, and bone cells. That's why chemotherapy side effects often include hair loss and nausea. Mustargen became the first chemotherapeutic drug approved by the FDA in 1949. Today, new treatments for cancer include ways to supercharge the body's immune system, like monoclonal antibodies, synthetic proteins that help train our body's immune system to kill or block the reproduction of cancer cells. In 1941, Germany launched the largest invasion in history, nearly 4 million troops against the Soviet Union. The Soviets responded with nearly 5 million soldiers of their own and millions of civilian defenders. After 3 years, including siege of the city of Leningrad, the Germans surrendered the Eastern Front. By 1944, U.S. bombing had destroyed the German synthetic oil production system, and the Nazis were literally running out of fuel. Many German officers wanted to surrender, which would have allowed for an orderly withdrawal, but Hitler refused. The Allied invasion of France in June 1944 led to 150,000 Allied dead, 5,000 to 12,000 German dead, and up to 200,000 prisoners of war. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide and Germany surrendered. Soviet and U.S. troops landed in Berlin, and the war in Europe was over. The war in Asia ended that summer. After U.S. nuclear bombing of Japan, the Soviets invaded Manchuria. Faced with certain defeat on two fronts, the Japanese emperor surrendered. There are still ethical controversies over using medical data produced in wartime. For example, scientists debate using data produced during sadistic Nazi experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. There has also been a lot of progress in the field of medical ethics. In the aftermath of World War II, 196 countries ratified the Geneva Conventions, which created international legal standards for humanitarian treatment during times of war. Several important medical advances, like mobile X-ray units and chemotherapy, can be associated with war. However, in almost all cases, these advances were substantially based on research that was done before or independently of the war effort. Peace is ultimately less expensive, more effective, and a far more humane way for science to progress. Now that you've watched the video, the next step is to take the quiz. Good luck, I know you'll do great.